Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new session of Euroquestions, or monthly webinar by the Jacques Delors Institute. Today, we will look at the impact of the war in Ukraine on energy. By cutting Russian fossil fuel export, the EU will deprive Vladimir Putin of hundreds of billions of euros that he needs to sustain his war effort. This could push him to eventually cut the military budget and negotiate. We welcome Thomas Pellerin-Carlin, Director of the Energy Center at the Jacques Delors Institute and researcher on energy policy. Before we start, let me remind you to use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lara, and thank you everyone for joining. So today I want to start by briefly summarizing the last 30 years of Ukrainian history, looking then at the military situation in Ukraine, because those two elements are important contextual elements to understand how we should adapt the European energy response to Putin's war on Ukraine. So to start right off, so Ukraine has a multi-secular history like any European nation and any European state, but we can start in 1991, the moment when the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine chose independence. And they chose independence through a free referendum that won an overwhelming majority everywhere in Ukraine. As you can see on the map, the results were overwhelmingly positive in favor of independence, with only a small majority in the Oblast of Crimea and Sevastopol, and a clear majority of more than 80% in the Oblast of Donetsk and Luhansk, where the most active part of the war is currently being waged by Vladimir Putin's forces. After that referendum, there was the need to ensure the security of Ukraine. And those security guarantees could be, Ukraine holding on to the Soviet nuclear weapon, which they had at the time. That would not have been the best way forward from a global perspective, because obviously we don't want to have too many countries with nuclear weapons. The alternative to that was found in 1994 with the Budapest Memorandum. And here on the slide, you can see the text of that memorandum that says that the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America, and here I'm quoting, reaffirm the commitment to Ukraine to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. So that document was signed in 1994. The Russian president then was Boris Yeltsin, who was, let's say, the man who found some guy named Vladimir Putin, who became his protege, his prime minister, and then his successor at the helm of the Russian Federation. 20 years after that Budapest Memorandum, there is one party to that memorandum, the Russian Federation, that did violate the independence, the sovereignty, and the existing borders of Ukraine. And so here we are in 2014, during the first invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin's Russia, a first invasion that provoked some limited diplomatic and energy response on the side of the European Union. Since 2014, there has been a war in Donbass. The war in Donbass is at least 8 years old already, and the territories on which there is fighting today were also territories on which there were fightings 8 years ago. More than 15,000 people died in the last 8 years before, so here between 2014 and 2021, including at least 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers and 5,000 civilians. So let's look at the military situation now. The military situation is evolving almost every week now, but at the beginning of the war, the situation seemed at least to be very much in favor of Vladimir Putin's forces. You see that here, the map on the left, which is the military situation on March the 17th. You see a whole assault on Ukraine, with the Russian forces trying to encircle Ukraine's two biggest cities, Kyiv, the capital city in the center north, and Kharkiv, the second biggest city in the northeast. Fast forward to the situation where we are today. Ukraine won several battles in the north, the battles of Kyiv, the battles of Chernihiv and Sumy. but the Putin forces, Russian forces, did also win their share of victories, especially in the south and in the east. And now the war is very much concentrated in the east. What we have now is what in academic studies we call a symmetric war. We've got two parties that have the same strength, militarily speaking, in terms of equipment. They have a similar quality of equipment. They have a similar quantity of soldiers. And symmetric wars in Europe are not new. We had quite a few in our history, just no symmetric war in our recent history. But those wars tend to end in two ways. The first way is that one party manages to overcome the symmetry and impose dissymmetry and becomes the party that wins the war. That's what happened during World War I on the Western Front. After 4 years of war, the French and the Brits and the Americans finally managed to achieve that dissymmetry and that breakthrough and that eventually victory after 4 years of war and the millions of people who died as a result. The other option is, essentially the moment where the two parties are just exhausted and they stop waging war because they don't have any more forces to throw at one another. This happened also in European history. We can think about the biggest war before World War I, which was the 30 Years' War, which killed a third of the German population, and a war that, as the name entails, lasted for 30 years. More recently, we had the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s that lasted for 8 years. So we are currently in that scenario. We are in that scenario of a protracted war that will likely last for years. And obviously, no one can predict whether it's going to be 1 year or 8 years or 20 years, just like no one could predict that for the Iran-Iraq war or even the 30 Years' War, because people back in the day did not call it that. This was obviously a name that we found after those 30 years of war in the center of Europe. In order to win such kind of a war, you need to have a massive economy and industrial apparatus. You need to be able to build and repair the kind of equipment that you need in order to wage what is currently being done in Donbass, which is trench warfare, and then eventually movement warfare with, we're talking battle tanks and cannons and shells and missiles and all the rest. In order to do that, both sides need money. The Ukrainian side has Western money from the US and Europe, but Putin's side only has the Russian federal budget, at least for now. And this is where really energy becomes center stage. Putin's war on Ukraine is a hydrocarbon war. It is a hydrocarbon war in the sense that it is the money that the sales of Russian hydrocarbon gave to Putin that allow him to build that military apparatus, to build that Russian army, and to think that this Russian army was strong enough for him to win quickly and decisively a total victory in Ukraine in February, March of this year. Obviously, we see that this money was not enough to achieve a total victory, but this money remains enough for Putin to achieve at least a partial victory. Just 2 days ago, we celebrated Europe's Day, which is linked to the Schuman Declaration of on May the 9th, 1950. And in that declaration, it's saying that his project is to make war unthinkable and also to make war materially impossible. And clearly today, we Europeans, we cannot make war between Ukraine and Russia unthinkable because it's happening under our eyes. But what we can do, however, is to make Putin's war on Ukraine materially impossible. How can we do that? Sanctions. A lot of them have already been implemented, but we have not yet targeted the jugular, if you want, of the Putin economic system, which is Russian energy exports, specifically to the EU, because the EU is by far the majority client, the best client for Russian fossil fuels. What you have on that graph is an estimate of the amount of money we Europeans are likely to give to Putin throughout the year 2022 if we don't implement an embargo on oil and gas. This amount of money I mean, it's just an estimate. Here are the estimation, and we explain that in the paper entitled "Stop Feeding the Bear." The estimate that we have here is 250 billion euros. It can be criticized as an estimate. I mean, I can't predict what is going to be the oil price in the next 6 months precisely. I can't predict that. But what is clear is the order of magnitude. The amount of money that we Europeans are giving to Putin to buy his oil and gas is in the hundreds of billions. That's clear. Since the beginning of the war, we sent to Putin around 60 billion euros. So that's the blue bubble, if you want, on the figure. We also have the orange one, and the orange one, it seems relatively small. It is 4 times smaller, and that's the entire Russian military budget for the year 2021. And I guess, I mean, obviously everything can be criticized in the precise numbers, but what can't be criticized is the difference in the order of magnitude. The amount of money we send to Russia, to Putin, to buy Russian oil and gas is 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more than the amount of money that goes to the entire military of the Russian Federation. So obviously, if we manage to cut that economic lifeline of the Putin regime, Putin will be pressured and will be forced, materially forced, to scale down at least his offensive wars and his offensive actions on Ukraine. And maybe eventually at some point, he will be forced to negotiate, at the very least, for a ceasefire, and hopefully at some point for an armistice, and if we can dream of it, even for a lasting peace. So what's the state of play today? The state of play is that we Europeans are currently addicts. We are addicted to Russian fossil fuels. And that addiction is funding Putin's war on Ukraine. That addiction, however, is not the result of a natural process. It is the result and the consequence of decades of political choices made at the EU level, but also at the national level, at the regional level, and also at the individual level. I just want to just give you one example. So I'm talking to you from Paris, and in 2008 in Paris, there was a big meeting, a form, if you want, of French Green Deal called the Accord de Grenelle, so the Grenelle Agreements on the Environment. And this agreement was supported by the then French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, who is really a mainstream conservative, not at all a pro-climate advocate. And this agreement that Nicolas Sarkozy supported included targets, or rather a plan for renovating buildings in France. If we had implemented, if the French had implemented that Nicolas Sarkozy policy, today France would be already free from Russian gas. Today, France would be consuming so little gas that we would even have extra gas, Norwegian gas, Algerian gas that could go not to France, but to countries that need it more, like Bulgaria and Poland, because Bulgaria and Poland already suffered from the gas embargo that Putin imposed on them at the end of the last month. So, as a consequence of that, since our addiction is the result of political choices, we can also be free to make other political choices today in order to free ourselves from that dependence, from that addiction. And that, in my view, would be the best way to ensure peace in our time. So today, the EU is adopting forms of what I would call the segmented, slow-moving embargoes, plural, on Russian fossil fuels. The EU already adopted an embargo on Russian coal, and that embargo will take full effect on August the 10th, so in 3 months now. The EU currently is discussing an embargo on Russian oil. I'm quite confident an agreement will be found around the proposal of the Commission. Currently, there is only Viktor Orban that is dragging his feet, which is obviously not a surprise. And what the Commission proposed, and it's likely to be really the center of the final decision, is implementing an embargo on Russian crude oil in the next 6 months, and then on all oil products, including refined products, by the end of the year. So that's going to be essentially for seven to 8 months, with exceptions for Slovakia, or rather special treatment for Slovakia and Hungary. The Commission proposes to give them more time until the end of 2023, because those two countries heavily rely on Russian oil coming from an oil pipeline called the Druzhba pipeline that was built at the time of the Soviet Union. All this happens while the Commission is proposing what is called the Repower EU strategy, which is a strategy to change the EU domestic energy policy in order to be able, for us Europeans, to face that embargo. Essentially, the energy objective is to go from historically 25% of our energy coming from Russia to 0. And obviously that 25% gap needs to be filled by changes in behavior, by renovating buildings, by deploying renewables, and also by buying non-Russian fossil fuel. And that's what the Repower EU strategy debate is about. So what we need to do is to better articulate actions that have an immediate impact, like the embargo, actions that have impact in the short term that prepare the next winter, 2022, 2023, and actions on the medium term, 2025 to 2035, actions that also aim to make sure that we make it as difficult as possible for Putin to find other clients than the Europeans. And there are many ways that we can go about it. From an energy perspective, we should structure, in my view, the EU response around 4 pillars: sufficiency, efficiency, renewables, and diversification. And I'll come back later on what we should do. The next important date is the European Commission's communication on May the 18th, so literally next Wednesday. And in the paper, what we recommend to the European Commission is first to have a communication that is centered on a principle that is coming from the US military, to be, if I'm being honest, on its origin, which is to say, be first with the truth. Currently, I've not seen any political leader that told it like it is, that told the entire truth to the European public. And I hope the European Commission can play that role. The situation where we are today is that an embargo is politically inevitable, and we must prepare accordingly. Some people still, let's say, fail to say that that embargo is now inevitable. And therefore, we continue to waste energy every day in Europe. We continue to burn gas uselessly, and that gas will be the gas that we will be lacking during the next winter. The second element is that oil and gas prices will remain high for the foreseeable future. And that changes a lot the way our economy works, the way our energy system also is going to work. And then if we want to be first with the truth, is that the best way to protect our economy, to protect our independence, to protect peace in Europe, and to protect freedom, and also, by the way, to protect our climate future, is a form of what I would call the general mobilization, a general mobilization of EU societies. What should that mobilization be about? It should be focusing on those 4 terms that I mentioned: sufficiency, efficiency, renewables, and diversification. I expect that next week, next Wednesday, the European Commission will present an energy savings plan. I hope this plan will be really ambitious and will include calls for behavioral changes, both individual behaviors and collective behaviors. We Europeans are living through the first conventional war on that continent since the end of World War II. We need to understand how historic this situation is. We need to understand that it's likely going to last for months and years, and that we can, if we want, choose to play our part, to be part of the solution for an immediate, well, not an immediate, but a peace that comes as soon as possible, and that can protect the freedom of each nation on our continent, including the Ukrainian nation. The second thing we should do is a massive financial, regulatory, and human investment to ensure the fast deployment of building renovation, so that's good for energy efficiency, and the vast deployment of renewables. And here, in terms of order of magnitude, what I have in mind is really what we Europeans did 2 years ago with COVID testing. 2 years ago, we were barely able to implement, a few thousand COVID tests every day. 1 year, 1.5 years later, we were able to do millions of tests every day. And this was not the result of, the invisible hand of the market. It was the result of proper planning, preparation, and mobilization of all the companies that were creating those tests, the businesses and individual companies that implemented those tests, nurses, pharmacists, etc. But also all the hundreds of millions of European citizens who voluntarily went there to suffer the pain of that nasal test, and who also played their part in making sure that as few Europeans as possible would die from COVID. And also, I forgot the digital developers that created the information system that allowed us to become better at delivering the right information as fast as possible. So in terms of scale, that's kind of what I think we should do in terms of building renovation, in terms of implementing renewables, obviously with the companies of that sector and with the consumers of that sector. So if you listening to today have the capacity to renovate your home or to install a heat pump or install a solar heating system, please do that. That would be a very helpful way to fight Putin. That may also protect you from future gas shortage and maybe electricity blackouts during the next winter. And last and least, in my view, a reasonable diversification towards non-Russian fossil fuels. This is something that has been so far the priority of EU leaders. I'm glad they've been working on that, but it should not be the priority. It should be the last resort because it's very expensive to find non-Russian oil and non-Russian gas today. And it's very bad for the environment. And it also increases our dependence on other countries like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia, other countries where we might have security of supply problem in the future because the Middle East has not been the most geopolitically stable area in human history. But there are positive ways to do that. One concrete thing that could be done is a further cooperation between the European Union and Algeria. Algeria is a major gas producer, but currently today they burn a lot of their gas to produce electricity. In Algeria, there are other ways to produce electricity than burning gas. It's an extremely sunny country. But still today, there is twice more solar electricity in Sweden than in Algeria. So we Europeans should work with the Algerian government and the Algerian people in order to support the fast deployment of solar panels in Algeria. So Algerian solar panels could produce electricity for Algerians. This will free up Algerian gas that can be shipped or rather sold to Europe through the existing infrastructure. So that really is a low-hanging fruit, economically and technically speaking, that we should seize in order to make sure that there is as much Algerian gas that can come to Europe as possible so we can store it. Not burn it and not waste it now, but store it for the winter because, as the saying goes, winter is coming and nobody is preparing for that, which I think is a problem.
Thank you, Thomas. We receive a few questions. You mentioned the concept of sufficiency earlier. Can you maybe expand on that?
Sure. So the concept of energy sufficiency is a relatively new one. It's not new in academia, but it's new in the debates. And there is a wonderful definition that was proposed just a few weeks ago, actually, by the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a United Nations organization that gathers scientists and who, for the first time ever, gave that kind of official international definition of energy sufficiency. And energy sufficiency is really about organizing society in a way that delivers comfort while reducing our demand for energy, for raw materials, for water. There is a collective dimension to energy sufficiency. For instance, infrastructure. If you live in a city where there is no sidewalks for pedestrians, where the city is made just for people driving cars like crazy, and there is no public transport, it's going to be very hard for you to do the sufficiency behavior, which is ideally walking, if not cycling, and if not cycling, taking public transportation. Obviously, you know, if you don't have that kind of infrastructure, it's very hard. And I'm saying that, and I'm, you know, living through that every day in Paris when I need to go to work to that very office, and I need to walk on a very small street that is packed with people, and we have a sidewalk that is like literally, you know, 160 centimeters wide, and obviously that's the kind of infrastructure that don't incentivize people to use walking and to use feet as the best technology ever invented in humankind for sapiens to move around. So sufficiency has to do with infrastructure. It also has to do with social norms. For instance, you know, if I tell you that I just spent the weekend in New York, that I took a plane, burned, you know, quite a lot of oil, and emitted, I guess, between 1 and 2 tons of CO2 just for a single weekend to have a French croissant in Brooklyn, how are you, Lara, going to judge me? Are you going to say, wow, that's great, you went to New York for the weekend, that's awesome. So that's a social norm that, you know, gives a positive dimension to the idea of traveling even very far away for a very short period of time. Or are you, Lara, going to react by saying, you know, that's criminal almost. That's a waste of oil. That's, you know, supporting Putin's war on Ukraine, because whenever you burn oil, you de facto support a higher oil price and therefore more money for Putin. That's tragic for the environment, etc., etc. So social norms are also impacted by this. In Japan, 10 years ago, after Fukushima, they made a massive national campaign in favor of sufficiency, and they managed to reduce electricity demand by 15%, which is massive, I hope we can do that. But this also means a change in social norms. Just as a fun fact, it became almost illegal in Japan for men to wear a tie during the summer, because when you wear a tie, I mean, very uncomfortable, but beyond that, you're very hot. And if you feel hot during the summer, you're going to increase the demand for energy because you're going to increase the air conditioning. And part of the Japanese Setsuden campaign was to ask everybody, but especially men in that case, not to wear ties and not to wear jackets in the office, so they could, you know, continue to work even if the temperature was, I don't know, 27 or 28 degrees rather than 22 or 23. And as you know, I'm thinking here about the Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, who said that you know, our choice today is between l'aria condizionata or la pace. So the air conditioning or peace. And there is a truth to that. So thinking about the summer, with the very hot temperatures we have currently on Western Europe, which is likely, by the way, an impact of climate change already. So with the very hot temperatures we have, let's also prepare not only for the winter, but for the summer, and to make sure that we use air conditioning as little as possible, because that's one way to choose peace.
Thanks, Thomas. Maybe a second question. How about Germany and Upstream 2?
Yeah, you know, as I said, the EU addiction to Russian gas is a consequence of political choices. It is specifically a consequence of German governmental political choices. For the past 15 years, the key foreign policy, energy policy of the German state, of the German government, or let me rephrase that, the key priority of German foreign energy policy was to make sure that Germany would become more dependent on Russian gas. And this was through infrastructure, through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline story is especially egregious and sad for us as Europeans, because that story happened after the first invasion of Ukraine. After the 2014 invasion of Ukraine by Putin, leading to the annexation of Crimea, leading to the war in Donbass, the German government of the time, Angela Merkel, Sigmar Gabriel, continued to push for that. And there is a group of people, especially in the German Social Democratic Party, including people like Sigmar Gabriel and Gerhard Schröder, who have been supporting this, quite both inside government and outside government. In the case of Gerhard Schröder, because he's Russian funded, as we now know. And that choice was going deeply against, European unity. As you can imagine, the Polish government was furious of that kind of new version of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement of 1939. That's the way they saw it, and that's the way the Polish media talked about it. With some, it was a reasonable comparison to a large extent. But there was also the European Commission going against that, saying that Nord Stream 2 should not be treated as just a private company deal. There was a geopolitical dimension. And the vice president of the time, Maros Šefčovič, vice president of the European Commission, was fighting in order to have a European approach to Nord Stream 2. And we at the Jacques Delors Institute were very much supportive of such a European approach. But that failed. And the first reason that failed is, the different German governments that invested political capital to ensure the failure of a European approach to Nord Stream 2. But also the Austrian government, the French government that also supported the German position, and the companies like NG, which is a French company, companies like OMV, which is an Austrian company, and other companies, especially in Germany, that not only supported Nord Stream 2, but actually invested money to make sure that that project would happen. And to me, that's clearly the kind of project that we should have killed from the get-go. Luckily, Olaf Scholz, the current Chancellor of Germany, suspended the project one day, I think, before the bombs started to fall on Kyiv. But still, the project exists physically, and currently the project has been suspended, not cancelled. And I think the very least that the current German government could do here is just to cancel Nord Stream 2 altogether. And that would be also a sign of understanding that we are in a new era, that there won't be any kind of, back to business as usual in the coming month, that this second war on Ukraine is really a historic game changer that changes not only German defense policy, which has already changed, but also German foreign policy structurally and German energy policy.
Thank you, Thomas. And regarding Nord Stream 2, there is a very valuable infographic made by our Energy Center available on website. Maybe another question would be regarding the energy prices. We were already in a crisis before the war started in Ukraine. Can you maybe talk about the high prices of the energy?
Sure. So we've been living through an energy price crisis for the last, I would say, 6 to 7 months at least. We started to see an increase in gas prices and oil prices in the summer of 2021, almost 1 year ago, essentially. And the main policy response to that situation was just politicians digging their heads in the sand, thinking that it was just a short-term element. And with a short-term crisis, we just managed to implement short-term measures and we're good. That was obviously a clear mistake. And we said so at the Jacques Delors Institute from October of 2021, that this energy price crisis would last for months, if not years. That was a structural element. And this was before the threat and then the real invasion of northern Ukraine by the Russian army, happened. In terms of, for how long as those prices are going to be very high, we should differentiate between oil and gas. Oil and gas are the two most important energy sources for all of us in Europe. Even in countries that have invested a lot in nuclear, like France, the final energy used in France comes first from oil and second from gas, third renewables and fourth nuclear. So really, oil and gas is critical for every member state. For oil, what we are living through reminds me of where we were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, from 2011 onwards, we had a massive global economic recovery after the subprime mortgage crisis and the economic recession of 2009. This led oil prices to go high. And at the same time, we had a geopolitical threat. because there were concerns about a potential war with Iran, a major oil and gas producer in the Middle East, with the Iranian nuclear program. And at that time, in 2012, 10 years ago, the EU adopted an embargo on Iranian oil and gas. And so the prices were between, let's say, $100 a barrel and $120 a barrel for 3.5 years. And so we might be in that situation again. Oil prices being high, being historically at high levels, but that are historical levels that we've already lived through, and remaining there for several years before new oil investment kicks in. And so that to me seems to be the most likely scenario. So high oil prices for several years, and then possibly a decline. For gas, the situation is very different. For gas, there is no historical precedent. Like when I'm looking at gas history, I don't see anything that can resemble what is happening currently. The gas prices have hit the highest historical levels already in September, and they have beaten that historical level time and again, even before the invasion, the second invasion of Ukraine by Putin. And so we are likely to be in that kind of very, very, very high, outrageously high gas prices for, I think, the entire decade. So until 2029, most likely. And even after that, even if the price decreases, they will remain very high because we are cutting ourselves, and rightfully so, from cheap Russian gas and importing expensive liquefied natural gas. And the liquefied natural gas market is a market where prices are always high, and when prices often spike whenever there is a problem somewhere. When there was Fukushima, after Fukushima, liquefied natural gas prices spike. Whenever there is a cold winter in China, LNG prices spike. Whenever there is a drought in Brazil, they have less water. They have less water to produce electricity, so they use more gas to produce electricity. And as you can imagine, with climate change, a drought in Brazil is going to be the new normal. So LNG prices are high. So I don't really see a situation ever where we Europeans would see gas prices that we had in the 2010 decade. So gas now is most likely structurally very expensive, and we need to make the kind of investment in renovation, the kind of investment in renewables that will mitigate the pain of very high natural gas prices for the next years and decades.
Thank you, Thomas. And thank you all for listening. Before we end this Euroquestion, I just wanted to put out Thomas' last publication that you mentioned in this webinar, Stop Feeding the Bird, the Case of the Smart Embargo on Putin's Oil and Gas, which is available on our website. Our next Euroquestion would be held on Wednesday, 25th of May. We will look at the idea of an European political community mentioned by President Emmanuel Macron in his speech at the European Parliament earlier this week. We will welcome our director, Sébastien Maillard, for this webinar. Please note that it will be held in French. Thank you all for your attention, and have a good end of the afternoon, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.